16 missed calls, 12 desperate voicemails, one dying child fighting for air, while her father partied with her mother's best friend and deliberately declined each call. What he didn't know was that his wife wasn't calling about dinner plans or another complaint. She was calling because their 5-year-old daughter had stopped breathing in her arms. And in that moment of choosing betrayal over duty, Cassian Ward, the man who controlled every dark corner of the city, had just lost everything that truly mattered. When Cassian Ward finally came home at dawn smelling like Tara's perfume, his wife was waiting with divorce papers, FBI-level secrets about his empire, and a rage cold enough to destroy the most powerful man in the city, and he'd handed her every weapon himself. Welcome to Empire Stories. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. Hazel Ward sat rigid in the plastic chair of the ER waiting room, her hands still shaking from performing CPR on her own daughter. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly white glow that made the blood on her sleeve look black instead of red. Around her, the organized chaos of the emergency department continued. Nurses rushing past, monitors beeping, someone crying behind a curtain. But all she could hear was the terrible silence of her phone. She pressed redial again, straight to voicemail. 5 years of marriage to Cassian Ward had taught her many things. She'd learned to navigate the dangerous world he inhabited, to smile at men whose hands were stained with blood, to keep secrets that could destroy empires. She'd learned that loving a man like Cassian meant accepting that his empire would always demand pieces of him she could never have. But she'd believed, foolishly, desperately, that their daughter would be the one thing that came first. Always. Her thumb hovered over the screen, debating whether to call again. She needed him. Not just for comfort, though God knew she needed that too, but for the connections only he possessed. The specialized doctors who didn't ask questions. The private medical contacts who could move faster than any hospital bureaucracy. The resources that existed in the shadows of his world. Resources that could mean the difference between good care and the best care for their little girl. The automatic doors hissed open, and Hazel's head snapped up, hope flaring briefly before dying. Just another family, their own crisis etched on their faces. Not Cassian, never Cassian when she needed him most. She looked down at her phone again, at the string of unanswered calls and increasingly frantic voicemails she'd left. Her voice had started out steady, "Cassian, please call me back. It's about our daughter," but had deteriorated into raw panic. "She's not breathing, Cassian. I need you. Please, God, please pick up." The doctor had said their daughter was stable now, that they'd caught it in time, that the allergic reaction was under control. But stable wasn't safe. Stable wasn't the kind of care that Cassian's world could provide. And stable certainly wasn't the same as having her husband beside her, his hand in hers, facing this terror together. Hazel pressed her palm against her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. She could still feel the phantom sensation of her daughter's tiny ribcage beneath her hands. Could still hear that awful, rattling gasp when she'd finally started breathing again. The memory made her stomach turn. Where was he? She tried calling once more, and this time when it went to voicemail, she didn't leave a message. What else was there to say? Her words were already scattered across his phone like breadcrumbs he refused to follow home. A nurse approached, her expression gentle. "Mrs. Ward, you can see her now. She's asking for you." Hazel stood on unsteady legs, her designer dress, the one she'd put on this morning in a different lifetime, now wrinkled and stained. She followed the nurse through the double doors, past the trauma bays and into the pediatric area, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Their daughter looked so small in the hospital bed, an IV taped to her little hand, monitoring leads attached to her chest. But her eyes were open, and when she saw Hazel, she reached out. "Mama," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed. Hazel gathered her into her arms, careful of the wires and tubes, and finally let herself cry. She pressed her face into her daughter's hair, breathing in the scent of her, beneath the antiseptic in fear, still her baby. "Where's Daddy?" her daughter asked. The question pierced something deep in Hazel's chest. He's, he's working, sweetheart. You know how daddy's work is. Even as she said it, she knew with a certainty that made her blood run cold. This wasn't work. Work was meetings and phone calls, warehouses and territory disputes. This was something else. The kind of silence that came with guilt. The kind of absence that had an explanation she didn't want to hear. Hazel pulled her daughter closer and stared at her phone lying dark on the hospital blanket. 16 missed calls, 12 voicemails, not a single response. She thought about the way Cassian had been lately, the late nights that stretched later, the distraction even when he was home, the way he'd look at his phone and smile at messages he never shared. She thought about Tara, her best friend, who'd been acting strange for months, canceling plans, avoiding eye contact, always asking where Cassian would be. The pieces had been there all along. She'd just been too afraid to assemble them. But now, sitting in this sterile room with their daughter finally safe in her arms and her husband still unreachable, Hazel felt something shift inside her. The fear that had sustained her through the crisis began to crystallize into something harder, colder. When Cassian finally came home, and he would eventually, he always did, he would find a wife who had survived the worst night of her life alone. A wife who had held their dying daughter and begged for help that never came. A wife who had been forced to realize that the man she'd pledged her life to had chosen something, or someone else when it mattered most. Hazel kissed her daughter's forehead and made a silent promise. Whatever explanation Cassian offered when he finally surfaced, whatever excuses or apologies he tried to give, nothing would ever be the same. She'd spent 5 years building her world around a man who wasn't there when it crumbled. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Her phone buzzed suddenly, and her heart leaped before she could stop it. But it wasn't Cassian. It was a text from an unknown number. A photo. Grainy, taken from across a room, but clear enough. Clear enough to see Cassian's distinctive tattoos. Clear enough to see the woman in the red dress wrapped around him. Clear enough to see that the woman was Tara. The timestamp read 30 minutes ago. Hazel looked at the photo for a long moment, her expression eerily calm. Then she deleted it, set her phone down, and turned her full attention back to her daughter. There would be time later for rage, for confrontation, for the systematic dismantling of everything Cassian Ward thought he controlled. But right now, in this moment, she chose to be present for the one person who had always deserved her completely. And when Cassian finally walked through their door, smelling of expensive whiskey and another woman's perfume, he would discover that some choices don't just have consequences. They have costs that can never be repaid. The evening had started so ordinarily that Hazel would later wonder if there had been signs she'd missed. Warnings written in a language she didn't yet speak. She'd given their daughter dinner, chicken fingers and apple slices, the same meal she'd eaten 100 times before. They'd watched cartoons together on the big sectional in the living room, her little girl curled against Hazel's side, her laughter filling the empty spaces of the penthouse that Cassian's absence always left behind. Cassian had texted around 6. Business dinner, don't wait up. 3 words that had become the punctuation of their marriage. Hazel had kissed her daughter's forehead at 8 o'clock and carried her to bed, her small body already heavy with sleep. Love you, Mama, she'd mumbled, and Hazel had pulled the covers up to her chin, checking the nightlight, leaving the door cracked exactly 3 inches the way she liked it. By 8:45, she'd poured herself a glass of wine and settled into the silence. This was her life now. Expensive loneliness. Waiting for a man who was always somewhere else. The scream came at 9:32. Hazel's glass shattered on the marble floor as she ran. She found her daughter sitting up in bed, clawing at her throat, her face already swelling, lips turning blue. Hives erupted across her skin like a wildfire spreading, and the sound coming from her chest, that horrible wheezing gasp, made Hazel's blood turn to ice. Baby, baby, look at me, Hazel commanded, her voice somehow steady even as her hands shook violently. She grabbed her daughter's face, trying to assess, trying to think through the panic that threatened to drown her. Allergic reaction. Severe. Her mind cataloged symptoms even as her heart screamed. She lunged for her phone on the nightstand and dialed 911 with trembling fingers, already running toward the bathroom where she kept the emergency kit. My daughter, she's 5. She can't breathe, allergic reaction. I need an ambulance now. The address spilled from her lips automatically while she tore through the cabinet, finding the EpiPen buried behind bottles and bandages. Have you ever had to save someone you love while your whole world collapsed around you? Her daughter's eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her swollen cheeks as Hazel ripped the EpiPen from its case. It's okay, baby. Mama's here. Mama's got you. She jammed the needle into her daughter's thigh, feeling the mechanism click, counting the seconds that felt like hours. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nothing happened. The wheezing got worse. Her daughter's lips darkened another shade. Hazel scooped her into her arms and ran for the door, still on the phone with dispatch, her daughter's body convulsing against her chest. The elevator took an eternity. The lobby blurred past. She burst through the glass doors into the night air just as the ambulance screamed around the corner, lights painting everything in shades of red and blue. She's not breathing right. She needs help, please. Hazel's voice finally broke as the paramedics took her daughter from her arms, as they laid her on the gurney, as one of them began barking orders while another established an IV line with practiced efficiency. Hazel climbed into the ambulance, her hands sticky with something she didn't want to identify, watching strangers fight for her daughter's life in the confined space. Someone pressed an oxygen mask over the little girl's face. Someone else administered another shot of epinephrine. The numbers on the monitors meant nothing to Hazel except that they were all wrong, all dangerously wrong. And in that moment, watching her daughter struggle for each breath, Hazel reached for her phone with blood-streaked fingers and called the one person who should have been there. The one person who'd promised on the day their daughter was born that nothing would ever matter more than family. The phone rang once, twice. Then Cassian declined her call. The hospital's fluorescent lights were merciless, exposing every crack in Hazel's composure as she paced outside the pediatric intensive care unit. Through the window, she could see her own daughter surrounded by machines, a breathing tube down her throat, monitors tracking every fragile heartbeat. The ER doctor had stabilized her enough to move her upstairs, but his words still echoed in Hazel's ears. The reaction was severe. We're doing everything we can, but the next few hours are critical. Everything they could, standard protocol, hospital bureaucracy, it wasn't enough. Hazel's fingers trembled as she dialed Cassian again, her third call in 10 minutes. She didn't need him for comfort anymore. That ship had sailed the moment he declined her first desperate plea. She needed him for what only he could provide. The ER was competent, but Cassian had access to specialists who didn't advertise. Doctors whose services came with NDAs and offshore payments. The kind of medical professionals who treated bullet wounds without questions and could source experimental treatments within hours. Their daughter needed more than competent. She needed the best, and the best existed in the shadows where Cassian operated. The call went straight to voicemail again. Cassian, I don't care where you are or what you're doing, Hazel said, her voice low and sharp. Our daughter is in the ICU. She nearly died. I need you to call Dr. Reeves. He owes you, remember? The thing in Prague? I need him here tonight with whatever cutting-edge antihistamine protocol he has access to. And I need access to the emergency account, the offshore one, because insurance is going to take days to approve anything beyond basic care. She paused, swallowing the bitterness that rose in her throat. I need you to be her father. Call me back. She ended the call and immediately tried again. Decline. The rejection felt intentional now, deliberate. Where could he possibly be that their daughter's life didn't warrant even a text message? A nurse approached, her expression professionally sympathetic. Mrs. Ward, the doctor wants to discuss treatment options. There's a specialist we can consult, but he's in Boston. It would take time to arrange a video conference. And his consultation fees aren't typically covered by... Money isn't an issue, Hazel cut her off. Get him on the phone now, whatever it costs. The nurse nodded and retreated, and Hazel realized with growing horror that she'd have to start making these decisions alone. The offshore account Cassian maintained, the one that funded their life of excess and insulated them from questions about income sources, required dual authorization for withdrawals over $50,000. She could access it, but only with his approval. His silence wasn't just emotional abandonment. It was a logistical nightmare that could cost their daughter everything. If you believe a parent should always answer when their child's life is on the line, hit subscribe. Only selfish people would scroll past. She called again. Voicemail. Cassian, I'm authorizing the emergency protocols myself. I'm contacting Reeves directly. If you gave a damn about her, you'd already be here. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. I'm going to remember this. When she asks where you were tonight, I'm going to tell her the truth. That when she needed you most, you couldn't be bothered to pick up your phone. Hazel ended the call and pulled up her contacts, scrolling to Dr. Reeves's private number. Cassian had introduced them at a charity gala 2 years ago, a brilliant immunologist who'd left mainstream medicine after some ethical controversy Cassian had helped bury. She'd never thought she'd need to use this connection. Her finger hovered over the call button as a terrible thought crystallized. What if Cassian wasn't answering because he couldn't? What if something had happened to him too? But no, if Cassian Ward was in danger, she'd know. The network of loyal soldiers who surrounded him would have called. This silence was a choice. The penthouse suite 40 stories above the city pulsed with low music and expensive laughter. Crystal glasses caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting the glittering skyline that stretched endlessly into the night. Beautiful people in beautiful clothes moved through the space like sharks circling prey, all of them orbiting around power, around money, around men like Cassian Ward. Cassian leaned back against the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his jacket discarded hours ago. The tattoos that crawled up his neck were fully visible now, marking him as something dangerous even in this room full of dangerous people. He felt good, better than good. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of his empire, the constant demands, the endless decisions, the suffocating responsibility had lifted. Tara Quinn pressed against his side, her red dress a slash of color against his dark shirt. Her perfume was intoxicating, something floral and forbidden that made him forget about spreadsheets and territory disputes and the wife who looked at him lately like he was already a ghost. Another drink? Tara asked, her fingers trailing down his arm. Why not? Cassian said, draining his glass. The alcohol had smoothed all the sharp edges of his thoughts, leaving only the pleasant warmth of the moment. This was what he'd needed. Escape. Permission to be someone other than the Atlas holding up everyone else's world. His phone buzzed on the bar. Hazel's name flashed across the screen for what must have been the 5th time that hour. Cassian reached for it, some deeply buried instinct making him hesitate. But Tara's hand covered his. Don't, she said softly, her eyes meeting his with an understanding that felt like absolution. You promised tonight was about you. She'll still be there tomorrow, complaining about the same thing she always complains about. You're right, Cassian said, and pressed decline. The phone went dark, and with it, whatever vague sense of obligation had flickered through his conscience. Hazel would be fine. She was always fine, probably calling about something mundane, his mother wanting to visit, or the contractor who was redoing the bathroom, or some charity event she wanted him to attend. The usual domestic demands that felt like chains tightening around his throat. Tara smiled and signaled the bartender for 2 more drinks. See, the world didn't end. You're allowed to breathe, Cassian. You're allowed to want something for yourself. The words settled over him like a comfortable lie. He'd built an empire from nothing, clawed his way to the top of a world that ate weak men alive. Didn't he deserve this? One night where he wasn't Hazel's disappointing husband, or his daughter's absent father, or his organization's infallible leader? You always know what to say, Cassian murmured, pulling Tara closer. She fit against him in a way that felt effortless, uncomplicated. There were no expectations here, no disappointed silences, or tired eyes tracking his every movement. That's because I actually see you, Tara said. Not the things you can provide or the problems you can solve, just you. His phone buzzed again. Cassian didn't even look this time, just reached over and switched it to silent. The vibration continued against the polished wood of the bar for a moment before going still. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that something felt wrong, that Hazel didn't usually call this many times, that maybe he should check. But then Tara's lips found his neck, and the music swelled, and someone across the room called his name with a laugh, and the moment passed. The voice went quiet. The phone stayed dark, and miles away in a sterile hospital room, his daughter struggled to breathe while his wife made impossible decisions alone. Comment family first if you'd never ignore calls when someone you love might need you. Manipulators like Tara won't. Dr. Patton had kind eyes, but they couldn't hide the concern etched into the lines around them. Mrs. Ward, your daughter is stable for now, but we need to discuss next steps. The allergic response was more severe than anything we typically see. We've administered standard treatment protocols, but there are experimental options, immunotherapy approaches that aren't widely available yet. Hazel sat in a small consultation room, her body present, but her mind scattered across a dozen catastrophic scenarios. What kind of experimental options? There's a clinical trial at Johns Hopkins, and I know of a private practice in Geneva that's had remarkable success with cases like this. But both options require significant coordination and, I'll be frank, substantial financial resources that aren't covered by insurance. We're talking hundreds of thousands, possibly more. Hundreds of thousands. The number should have made Hazel flinch, but money had stopped being real to her years ago. What was real was her daughter's labored breathing, the monitors that kept alarming, the way the nurses' smiles never quite reached their eyes. Whatever it takes, Hazel said. I'll figure out the money. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. Cassian's offshore accounts were locked behind protocols designed to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral access. The legal accounts, the ones attached to legitimate businesses, would take days to access in amounts this large. Days they might not have. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. There's also the matter of privacy. Given your family's profile, you might want to consider transferring her to a private facility. The media attention, if this becomes public. I understand, Hazel cut him off. The thought hadn't even occurred to her, but of course it should have. Cassian's name attached to a hospital emergency would draw reporters like blood-drew sharks. Their daughter's medical crisis would become tabloid fodder within hours. How quickly can a transfer be arranged? With the right connections, within a few hours. But Mrs. Ward, moving her in her current condition, carries risks. Hazel pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to think through the exhaustion and terror. Every decision branched into a dozen more decisions, each one carrying stakes she couldn't fully comprehend. This was Cassian's world, the world of influence and underground networks, of doctors who didn't exist on paper, and facilities that catered to people who needed discretion as much as they needed medicine. She needed him, hated that she needed him, hated more that he still wasn't there. Her phone felt like lead in her hand as she dialed again, straight to voicemail. Her voice cracked as she began speaking. Cassian, our daughter is dying. Do you hear me? She is dying. I don't care what business deal you're closing or what meeting you're in. I need Dr. Reeves's direct line. I need the Geneva facility's contact. I need authorization for the Switzerland account. She drew a shaking breath. I need you to prove that you're still the man I married, the man who held our baby girl and promised nothing would ever hurt her. Please, God, Cassian, just call me back. She hung up and immediately called again, leaving another message. It's Tara, isn't it? I'm not stupid, Cassian. I've seen the way you two look at each other. The late nights, the excuses. Fine. Have your affair. Destroy our marriage. But don't you dare let our daughter pay the price for your selfishness. Call me back. The phone stayed silent in her hand. Its dark screen reflecting her own hollow expression. Around her, the hospital continued its rhythm. Pages over intercoms, squeaking wheels, distant crying. Normal sounds of crisis management when nothing about this was normal. Have you ever felt completely alone in a room full of people trying to help? Hazel stood and walked back to the ICU window, watching nurses adjust medications, check vitals, make notes on charts. They were doing their parts, doing them well, but it wasn't enough. Her daughter deserved more than well. She deserved the best that money and power could buy, and the man who held those keys had turned his phone to silent. 3:17 in the morning. The numbers on the waiting room clock seemed to mock Hazel with their slow progression, each minute dragging into the next like hours. The coffee in her hand had gone cold an hour ago, but she kept holding it anyway, needing something to anchor her trembling fingers. Dr. Patel had come out 20 minutes earlier with news that should have flooded her with relief. Stable vitals, breathing normalized, immediate danger past. Her daughter would live. The words should have broken the dam of terror she'd been holding back, should have sent her to her knees with gratitude. Instead, Hazel had simply nodded, thanked him quietly, and returned to this plastic chair in the corner of the waiting room. Because stable didn't mean safe. Stable didn't mean this wouldn't happen again. And stable certainly didn't change the fact that she'd faced the worst night of her life completely alone. The waiting room had emptied as morning approached. The other families with their own crises had cycled through, some leaving with relief, others with grief carved into their faces. Hazel remained, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline that had already failed her. She unlocked it for the 100th time, staring at the unanswered calls. 16 now. 16 times she'd reached for her husband and found only silence. The voicemails she'd left played on a loop in her mind, her voice progressing from panic to desperation to something cold and brittle that she barely recognized. The phone felt heavier with each passing hour, weighted with everything it represented. Not just Cassian's absence tonight, but every missed dinner, every broken promise, every time his empire had mattered more than his family. She'd made excuses for years. He's building something. He's protecting us. This is temporary. But temporary had become permanent, and she'd been too afraid to admit what she'd known all along. She was alone, had been alone for longer than she'd allowed herself to acknowledge. A nurse approached with a blanket, draping it gently over the Hazel's shoulders. "Your daughter is resting comfortably. You should try to get some sleep, Mrs. Ward. You've been here all night." Hazel pulled the blanket tighter, but it did nothing to warm the cold that had settled deep in her bones. "I'm fine," she lied. The nurse's eyes were too knowing, too kind. "Is there someone we can call? Your husband, family, a friend?" The question landed like a physical blow. Hazel shook her head, not trusting her voice. How could she explain that her husband was unreachable, that her best friend was the reason why, that the family she'd built her entire life around had crumbled the moment it was actually tested? When the nurse left, Hazel finally let the tears come. Silent, exhausted tears that had nothing to do with the medical crisis and everything to do with the realization crystallizing in her chest. Cassian wasn't coming. Not tonight, not when it mattered. And when he finally did surface with whatever excuses he'd manufactured, it would be too late. The damage was already done. Not to their daughter. Dr. Patel's skills and the hospital's resources had saved her. No, the damage was to the foundation Hazel had believed was unshakable. The marriage she'd poured herself into, the trust she'd given so freely to a man who'd proven, in the moment of ultimate crisis, that his priorities lay elsewhere. She pressed the phone to her chest and stared at the fluorescent lights above, letting the truth wash over her in waves. This was her life. This sterile waiting room. This crushing solitude. This moment of clarity where everything she'd refused to see came into sharp, merciless focus. And somewhere in the city, Cassian Ward was still choosing everything except her. Hit like if you believe partners who abandon their family in crisis don't deserve second chances, cheaters and liars will keep scrolling. Dawn was breaking over the city when Cassian finally pushed open the door to the penthouse. His movements unsteady, his tie long gone. The apartment was dark except for the pale light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. He expected silence, expected Hazel to be asleep, expected to slip into bed with his secrets intact. Instead, he found his wife sitting on the sofa in yesterday's clothes, her face a mask of something that made his alcohol-fogged brain struggle to catch up. "Hazel?" His voice came out rough, guilty in ways he couldn't quite place yet. "Why are you still up?" She didn't answer immediately, just watched him with eyes that seemed to see straight through his skin. The silence stretched between them, heavy with something Cassian's instincts recognized as danger even if his mind was too slow to identify it. "Where were you?" Hazel asked finally, her voice eerily calm. Business dinner ran late. I told you. Cassian started, but she cut him off with a laugh that had no humor in it. Business dinner? Of course. She stood slowly, and Cassian noticed for the first time the streaks of dried blood on her sleeve, the hospital bracelet around her wrist. His stomach dropped. What happened? Are you hurt? Not me, Hazel said, moving closer. Each step felt deliberate, predatory. Our daughter, she had a severe allergic reaction last night. Stopped breathing. I called 911, performed CPR on our 5-year-old child, rode in an ambulance while she convulsed in my arms. Her voice remained steady, factual, which somehow made it worse. She's alive, by the way, in case you were wondering. Stable. The doctors saved her. The words hit Cassian like physical blows, each one stripping away the pleasant fog of alcohol and replacing it with cold, dawning horror. What? When? Why didn't you call you? Hazel's laugh turned sharp. Oh, Cassian, I did call you 16 times. I left voicemails begging you to answer, telling you our daughter was dying, asking for your help accessing the resources only you control. She was close enough now that he could see the exhaustion carved into her features. The tears dried on her cheeks. But you were too busy at your business dinner to pick up. My phone, I didn't. Cassian fumbled for his phone, but Hazel's next words stopped him cold. You smell like perfume, she said quietly. Not mine. Something floral. Expensive. She leaned in, inhaling deliberately, and Cassian watched her face transform as recognition hit. That's Tara's perfume. White gardenia. She wore it at my birthday party last month, remember? When you two disappeared for 20 minutes and came back with the same guilty expressions. The truth hung between them like smoke, impossible to disperse. Cassian opened his mouth, scrambling for explanations, denials, anything to stop the look spreading across his wife's face. Don't, Hazel said, stepping back. Don't insult me by lying. Our daughter almost died last night, and you were with my best friend. Her voice finally cracked, revealing the devastation beneath the calm. You chose her over our child. Over me. You let 16 calls go unanswered while I watched our baby fight for her life. Cassian felt the floor tilting beneath him, reality crashing down with sickening clarity. The ignored calls, Tara's whispered encouragements, the deliberate silencing of his phone. All of it suddenly connected to this moment, to the horror in Hazel's eyes. I didn't know, he managed. I swear, I didn't know she was— It doesn't matter, Hazel interrupted, her tone flat. You didn't know because you didn't care enough to find out. You saw my name and decided whatever I needed wasn't important enough to interrupt your night. She turned away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. I needed you, Cassian. For the first time in our marriage, I truly needed you. And you weren't there. Subscribe if you stand with mothers who fight alone while their partners betray them. People like Cassian won't. Cassian's hands shook as the full weight of what he'd done crashed over him. His daughter, his little girl who called him daddy with absolute trust, who ran to him when he came home, who believed he could fix anything. She'd been dying while he'd been— I need to see her, he said, his voice breaking. I need to go to the hospital. I need to— No, Hazel's word cut through the air like a blade. You don't get to walk in there now and play the concerned father. She asked for you all night, Cassian. She kept asking where you were while they put tubes down her throat. I told her you were working because I couldn't bear to tell her the truth, that her father was too busy fucking my best friend to care whether she lived or died. The words hit like bullets, each one finding its mark. Cassian stumbled back, reaching for the wall to steady himself. Hazel, please. I can fix this. I can make this right. It was a mistake, a terrible— A mistake. Hazel's composure finally shattered, her voice rising. Declining 16 calls while your daughter fought for her life wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose Tara. You chose betrayal. You chose yourself. She moved to the dining table where a manila envelope sat waiting, and Cassian felt something cold settle in his chest at the sight of it. What is that? Your future, Hazel said, sliding the envelope across the marble surface. Divorce papers. My attorney had them drawn up months ago, back when I first suspected. I've been waiting for the right moment to use them. Congratulations, you finally gave me one I can live with. Cassian stared at the envelope like it might explode. You can't be serious. Hazel, I know I messed up, but we can work through this. Counseling, whatever you need. What I need, Hazel interrupted, her voice dropping to something deadly calm, is for you to sign those papers and transfer 70% of all marital assets into an account in my name. The offshore holdings, the legitimate businesses, the property portfolio, all of it. 70%? That's fair, Hazel finished, considering what I know about your operation. The warehouse in Newark that doesn't appear on any tax documents. The shipping routes through Rotterdam that customs seems to mysteriously overlook. The cash houses in Queens. She watched Cassian's face drain of color. Did you think I was blind all these years? I'm your wife. I paid attention. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but crystal clear. Cassian felt the trap closing around him, felt his empire, everything he'd built, everything he'd sacrificed for, teetering on the edge of exposure. You wouldn't, he said, but even he could hear the weakness in his voice. Try me, Hazel said. Refuse to sign and I'll hand everything I know to the FBI. Every ledger, every contact, every dirty secret you've ever told me in the dark. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and our daughter will grow up knowing her father chose his mistress over his freedom. She paused, letting the words sink in. Or you can sign, give me what I'm asking, and maybe I'll let you earn your way back into her life. Not mine, never mine again, but hers. Cassian's mind raced, looking for exits, for leverage, for any way to regain control of the situation spiraling away from him. But every angle led back to the same truth: he'd lost. The moment he'd pressed decline on that first call, he'd set this in motion. I love you, he said desperately. I love our daughter. I can change. I can be better. You had your chance to be better, Hazel said. It was last night. Every time that phone rang was another chance, and you ignored every single one. She pushed the envelope closer. Sign the papers, Cassian. It's over. What would you do if someone betrayed you when you needed them most? Comment below. Cassian signed the papers at dawn, his hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. Each signature felt like cutting away pieces of himself, the empire he'd built from blood and ruthlessness, the power he'd convinced himself justified everything. Hazel watched without emotion, collected the documents, and left for the hospital without another word. The penthouse felt cavernous in her absence. Cassian stood at the window, staring at the city he had once believed he owned, and felt nothing but the hollow ache of a man who'd finally understood the price of his choices. His phone buzzed. Tara's name flashed across the screen, and for the first time in months, the sight made him feel sick. Don't call me again, he said when he answered, his voice flat. Cassian? What's wrong? Did your wife? My daughter almost died last night, he cut her off. While I was with you, my child stopped breathing. My wife called me 16 times begging for help, and I ignored every single call because you convinced me I deserved a night off. The words tasted like ash. We're done. Delete my number. If you try to contact me again, you'll regret it. He hung up before she could respond and blocked her number immediately. The satisfaction he expected never came. Nothing came except the memory of his daughter's face the last time he'd seen her, 3 days ago, rushing out the door to a meeting he couldn't even remember now. The next 48 hours blurred together in a series of brutal conversations. Cassian called his second-in-command and began the process of delegation he'd sworn he'd never do. Territory management, shipment oversight, enforcement decisions, all of it passed to men he'd spent years micromanaging because he couldn't trust anyone else to handle his empire correctly. You sure about this, boss? Dmitri asked, his confusion evident. You've never stepped back from operations before. I'm sure, Cassian said, and realized he meant it. The empire that had consumed his life suddenly felt insignificant compared to the wreckage of his family. What good was controlling the city if he'd lost the only people who mattered? His attorneys worked around the clock to execute the asset transfers Hazel demanded. 70%. The number should have destroyed him, but watching his net worth plummet felt almost like relief. Every dollar transferred was penance, though he knew it would never be enough. On the third day, Cassian went to the hospital. He stood outside the pediatric wing for 20 minutes, gathering courage he'd never needed for business negotiations or territory wars. When he finally entered his daughter's room, she was awake, coloring in a book while Hazel sat beside the bed. His daughter looked up, and her face lit up with uncomplicated joy. "Daddy!" The word broke something in Cassian's chest. He crossed the room and knelt beside her bed, taking her small hand in his tattooed one. "Hi, baby girl. I'm so sorry I wasn't here." "Mama said you were working," she said simply, already forgiving him in the way only children could. But Hazel's eyes told a different story. She would never forget, never forgive. And Cassian understood with crushing clarity that this was his future, earning scraps of his daughter's time while the woman he loved looked at him like a stranger. "I'm not working anymore," Cassian said, stroking his daughter's hair. "Not like before. From now on, I'm here. Whenever you need me, I'm here." His daughter smiled, believing him with the faith he'd already proven he didn't deserve. Behind her, Hazel's expression remained carved from ice. Cassian had spent his entire adult life building an empire, convincing himself that power and control were what mattered. He'd climbed to the top of a world most men couldn't survive, had made himself untouchable, feared, respected. And he'd lost everything the moment he'd pressed decline on his wife's call. The empire was crumbling, his marriage was over, and the only question remaining was whether he could salvage even the smallest piece of his daughter's trust before that crumbled too. 6 months later, Hazel stood on the balcony of her new home overlooking the harbor, watching sailboats drift across water that caught the afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. The house was smaller than the penthouse, modest by the standards she'd grown accustomed to, but it was hers. Clean money, clean deed, clean conscience. She'd chosen the location carefully, far enough from Cassian's world that the shadows couldn't reach them, close enough that their daughter could maintain the connection Hazel had promised to preserve. Not for Cassian's sake, never for his sake, but for the little girl who still lit up when her father arrived for his scheduled visits, who didn't need to carry the weight of adult betrayals. Inside, she could hear her daughter's laughter mingling with Cassian's deeper voice. They were building something with blocks, and her daughter was explaining with elaborate seriousness why the tower needed to be exactly 7 stories tall. Hazel listened to Cassian's patient responses, the genuine interest in his tone, and felt the familiar war of emotions she'd been fighting for half a year. He'd changed. That was undeniable. The man who showed up every Tuesday and Saturday at exactly 3 o'clock wasn't the empire-obsessed stranger she'd confronted that terrible morning. This version of Cassian arrived with coloring books and questions about her daughter's day. He sat on the floor for tea parties. He'd learned to braid hair through YouTube videos and practiced until he could manage a passable French braid. Most importantly, he never missed a visit, never showed up late, never checked his phone while his daughter talked. But change didn't erase history. Hazel had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. "Mama, come see," her daughter called, and Hazel returned inside to find an impressively precarious block tower. Cassian sat cross-legged on the carpet, his expensive suits replaced by jeans and a simple shirt, his tattooed hands steadying the base. "It's magnificent," Hazel said, crouching beside them. Her daughter beamed, already reaching for more blocks, and for a moment the three of them existed in something that looked almost like family. Almost, but not quite. Cassian's eyes met hers over their daughter's head, and Hazel saw the question he asked every visit without words. "Is there a chance? Can we ever?" She looked away. Some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. Trust wasn't a block tower you could rebuild from scratch. It was something more fragile, and Cassian had shattered it completely on a night when she'd needed it most. Later, after their daughter had run to her room to get a specific toy, Cassian stood to leave. He always left before being asked, another small sign of respect for the boundaries Hazel had established. "She's doing well," he said quietly. "No more reactions. The new medication protocol is working." "Yes," Hazel agreed. She'd made sure of that, had taken the resources from the divorce settlement, and found the best specialist money could buy. Their daughter was thriving now, safe and healthy in ways that had nothing to do with Cassian's underground connections. Thank you, Cassian added, and Hazel knew he wasn't talking about the blocks or the visit. He was thanking her for not destroying him completely, for allowing him this chance to know his daughter, for the mercy he probably didn't deserve. Hazel nodded but said nothing. Mercy wasn't forgiveness. Coexistence wasn't reconciliation. Their daughter ran back in, and Cassian knelt to say goodbye, promising to bring the art supplies she'd requested for the next visit. She hugged him fiercely, and he closed his eyes like he was memorizing the feeling. When he left, Hazel locked the door behind him and returned to the balcony. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her daughter joined her, climbing into her lap with the easy affection of a child who felt secure and loved. Daddy's different now, her daughter observed with the startling insight children sometimes possessed. Yes, Hazel said, stroking her hair. He is. Do you think he'll stay different? It was the question Hazel asked herself during every visit, every genuine smile, every sign that Cassian was fighting for redemption rather than control. The truth was, she didn't know. Time would tell if this change was permanent or just another performance from a man skilled at getting what he wanted. But watching her daughter's peaceful expression as they gazed at the sunset together, Hazel realized something important. It didn't matter. She'd built a life that didn't depend on Cassian's reliability. Her daughter was safe, healthy, surrounded by love. They had peace, security, and a future that belonged entirely to them. If Cassian continued to show up, to be present, to prove his transformation was real, that would be a bonus, not a necessity. Hazel had learned the hardest lesson anyone could learn. The only person you could truly depend on was yourself. And that knowledge, painful as it had been to acquire, had set her free. Comment New Beginnings if you believe starting over takes more strength than holding on to what's broken. Thanks for watching this emotional journey with us. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. We'll see you in the next one.